Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope I'm not disappointing here. I got a lot of feedback on my picture there that it might have been taken a long time ago. And I think that's a nice way of saying I look old, but I don't know, I still think I look good, so. Anyway, I'm Mike Baran. I'm from Pfizer. I think we're the first pharma company to make an investment in DeSci. I'm proud of that. Yep. We try to say that Pfizer is innovative in what we do in R&D, and I think there's nothing more innovative than this. I think Tyler coined this as a movement this morning. DeSci as a movement. It certainly is. And that brings me to this room. The other thing I was surprised about that Paul said this morning was it's been 1 year, right? The first DeSci Berlin conference was 1 year ago. I thought this was the third one, and last year's event was actually the one that it made a big difference in kind of my view of DeSci and what was going on. There's clearly like an energy in this room, and I said, we have to be a part of this. So it's an honor to be on the stage, and I think the reason it feels like year 3 instead of year 2 is that just so much has happened, right? Like last year when the conference happened, I wasn't here, but I downloaded it off of YouTube. I watched it on a plane. And there was no pharma company invested in DeSci. We invested probably 2 or 3 months after this conference. We just heard BioDAO is putting a compound into clinical trials. I mean, that's amazing. Who would have ever thought that? And there's a handful of DAOs now that are making solid progress. And I'll tell you a little bit about BioDAO today. That's the one that we're involved in, of course. So the title of my talk is R&D 2030. So we're supposed to be forward-looking here. And decentralized pools of innovation as novel sources of therapeutic substrate. And we'll do this in 2 parts. So the first part, we're going to talk about why we need DeSci. I think everybody knows why we need DeSci. We've said it many times throughout the day, right? It's challenging to fund early stage research. But I'm going to tell you why that actually is from the pharma side of the table, why it's hard for us to fund early stage research. So we put a little bit of detail behind that. And then I'll give some updates on BioDAO and how it's going and how we see it there. Okay, so why DeSci? I'll start with this phrase here, and anyone that's an entrepreneur has heard this. You give your pitch, and they say, sorry, you're too early. So what does this really mean, you're too early? Does it really mean you're too early and generate some more data and come back and we'll fund you? Or is it a nice way of kind of just saying, not interested? I think the answer is really both. I do this myself, I'm guilty. But let me tell you what we mean here when we say too early and what's really driving that. So I love this slide. I've showed it before in the past. This is from Fierce Biotech about a year ago, but the situation is the same today. Pharma has a big revenue problem going out into the end of the decade, into 2030, and that being there's a number of drugs that are coming off patent. And so if you look at this chart here, the names are some of the biggest drugs. These are the crown jewels of pharma, right? The biggest sellers. The red dots are when they're coming off patent between 2030 on the left, 2020 on the left, 2030 on the right. And then you have the sales, right? And on the bottom here, you just see $200 billion in revenue coming off patent. Those revenues not only have to be replaced, we need to add to that. We, pharma, we're publicly traded companies. So it's not enough to just replace these revenues. We need to show growth in earnings per share. Otherwise, the street doesn't like that, and your stock price gets hammered. And so just to put a little bit more numbers behind this from Pfizer, we have about, I think, 17 to 19 billion coming off patent between now and 2030. And we've promised 6% growth per year. If you take our internal portfolio, we think that would just barely offset the loss of exclusivities. So where does the growth come from? It's got to come from somewhere. The answer is we need to do more partnering, and we need to kind of buy assets from biotech. And of course, those assets need to generate revenue by 2030. So here's my first hint. If you're going to be in position to generate revenues by 2030, you have to be in the clinic today, maybe even past phase 1. So, if you're looking at a very early academic opportunity, seed stage biotech, it's just going to be harder to prioritize that kind of investment. Okay, so the second thing I want to make the point about is Benji actually just made a comment that he said something like, pharma's got unlimited money, deep pockets. It's true, but I think it's not the money for early stage R&D or external partnership, it's not what you might think. And let me walk you through that right here with this bar chart on the left. So this is a Mike Baran special. I made this myself. Well, you could probably tell I made the chart myself, but I did the data analysis myself. So I took the R&D budget of the top 10 pharma companies, and I just took the average R&D budget, and it comes out to 10 billion per year. That's the red bar there. So the next bar, the blue bar, is how much is spent on research, right? So I said R&D budget, R, research, D, development, development basically clinical trials. And when you look at it on average, 80% of the R&D budget, 80%, huge piece of it, right, just goes to running clinical trials. So your 10 billion automatically comes down to 2 billion. Still a lot of money, right? But 2 billion for research. Now, almost every pharma company that has an R&D division does internal R&D. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of infrastructure involved, right? You got to pay people, you got to have physical locations. Probably for every scientist, there's like 5 non-scientists supporting that person in a pharma organization. So I conservatively said here, let's say 5% of the research budget is used for external R&D partnering. That brings you down to $100 million. So now you're a long way from 10 billion, but 100 million is still a lot of money, right? And the last thing to keep in mind is that of that 100 million, you know, when you do a deal in the early stage, or any stage actually of biotech, they're usually milestone based. So there's an upfront payment, excuse me, and then as success milestones are met, you know, there's additional payments. So you have to budget for those in the out years. So you come into like this year, and you have to, you know, account for all of the previous year's research collaborations and deals that were done that might have milestones that hit the budget this year. So we typically just think about it that we need to save 50% of the budget to pay for milestones. So now you're down to 50 million. That's a huge attrition. $10 billion, unlimited money, 50 million to do deals. And I can tell you, I probably look at maybe in some weeks 100 different opportunities a week, and I'm just one person at Pfizer. So what are the odds of your one earlier stage opportunity being one that gets traction? And if you look at the right side here, we'll put some numbers behind this. So the average upfront on a, we'll say, candidate or clinical phase 1 stage asset is about somewhere in the $5 to $20 million range. So you do 2 of those, and you're an average pharma company, you know, you eat up most of the budget, right? Now, you do 1 of them, you can probably do a few more platform deals or academic collaborations, but you're going to net out somewhere around, you know, 1 or 2 biotech deals for an asset, and maybe 10 to 20, 5 to 20, I wrote here, depending on the company. But, you know, that's not that many, right? So, yes, there's a lot of money. A lot of it goes to development, and at the end of the day, not as much as you might think for early stage research. And if you take into account my first slide, which showed how much revenue is coming off and how much pressure there is to replace that revenue, you know, the prioritization is going to skew towards the later stage opportunities. And that's the problem that we have here. And that's why Valley of Death stage science doesn't get as much investment as it should. So, are there alternative financing models for early stage science? Of course there are, right? I didn't even get to DSci yet. But these are pretty established models here, right? So you can make equity investment. That's what I do all day, Pfizer Ventures. Gave a shout out to some of my German corporate venture groups, being in Germany here, M Ventures and Leaps. Accelerators, not a new concept, right? We have one called CTI, Centers for Therapeutic Innovation. There's others. Consortiums have been around forever, right? But these are not new. These are just kind of new logos and new names to established concepts. So if you think like that, then you still have this big problem that I've been talking about for 5 minutes now. So that's where DSci comes in, and we all love this view here from Ultra Rare Bio. I think when I learned about BioDAO, there was like 3 or 4 dots you could put on a slide like this. I think next year we probably need a second slide. And that just goes to show the momentum here in the space. So I don't need to spend too much time on this with this audience here, but some of the pros and cons as I see it for DSci. So the left is the pros, the right is the cons. Obviously, alternative capital source here. This is another pool of money coming in to fund early stage research, exactly what we need. I think the network effects are something that can't be understated. I can speak from my experience at BioDAO. We do great when it comes to sourcing deals and having people chip in to due diligence on deals. That is just, I'm actually surprised at the quality and the depth of people that that participate in BioDAO and enable us to do deals. And then transparency we've spoke about, right? Everything's on the blockchain. You can see it. Now on the right side are some of the cons, and we're still working through all of these. So obviously legal regulatory hurdles, the rules are being written, and they're not being written in the same way across all different countries. So luckily we have Jesse and Chris over here to help navigate. Liquidity is also a challenge. You know, some of you may have seen BioDAO had a large stakeholder sell about a week or two ago. You can quickly see your token price diminish if a large stakeholder decides to sell at this point in the game, right? And then the biggest thing, as I see as a risk, is track record, right? In order to attract new investors, they're going to say, well, you know, how have you done, right? And if you don't have any wins to point to, it's a little bit of a tougher sell. But I think we'll get there with that one. Okay, so last few slides here. How's it going with BioDAO, and how do I see it? So on the left here, you have the BioDAO token price. Again, everything's public, so I think if you did a little bit of Googling, you could figure out where we came in and what we paid. I'll just tell you it's on the left side there, all right? So around $1 plus or minus a few cents. So we're happy, right? You can see the liquidity event I mentioned on the right, where the price kind of dropped a few weeks ago, but we're already rebounding. I mean, you know, Pfizer's not really in this to make money. We can't lose money, otherwise that wouldn't be a good look. But I think, you know, we have a nice return already about a year in. Where most of our interest is, and why we got involved with BioDAO, is on the strategic impact side. And by that, I mean, how does our participation in BioDAO help potentially impact the Pfizer R&D drug discovery pipeline? And at this point, it's really that we get access to deal flow that we might not have seen, right? And as I mentioned, if all of you are welcome to join. It's open to everyone. Our Friday, we meet and we have our deal flow calls. You can come look at the companies that are pitching to us. But more importantly are the ones that actually get financed. And hopefully then those companies or academics are generating data that we can look at using the business development lens for a collaboration or more than that at some point in the future. So on the right, I just list a few that are in areas that Pfizer is very interested in. And so you see some areas like RNA stability, nanoparticles, cardiovascular disease. So we'll see where these companies go. It's exciting to follow. Now, as far as DeSci, I'm pretty sure BioDAO, it's definitely, I think it's the first DeSci DAO that was spun out, probably the biggest in terms of market cap. And on the left are some figures that you've probably seen on the website. So we've been doing deals and we have nice access to capital. But on the right is what I want to talk about a little bit more. So there's actually 2 tokens now, and a third, it won't be a token, but a third fund on the way in the fall. So, you know, Benji just took us through the IPT concept. We've heard about IP NFTs as well. This is kind of how I view how that integrates into BioDAO. So on the left there, on the bottom, you have the Vita token, right? And I call this a passive token because while you can be active in bringing deals to the DAO and helping diligence them and vote on what we're actually going to fund, once the money goes out the door, you know, we're not really guiding those companies so much. It's more a passive investment, right? Now, the first IPT, which we call VitaFast, that's the Viktor Korlichuk project, is active now as of a month ago. And I also call this an active token, right? Because it allows you to actively participate in the project that, you know, BioDAO funded earlier. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, nothing like this exists in the world of financing early stage science, right? You have a novel concept here with the accelerator called BioDAO itself, or DAO. And now you can actually, if you want, you can participate in the actual projects. I mean, that is pretty cool. I'm super excited to see how this plays out. And on top of that, this VitaFast token is tradable, right, on a you know, decentralized exchange. So it's also a first in that for the first time ever, you have price discovery playing out for, early stage academic IP that for the most part has been illiquid for years. And just a quick comment how I see that potentially going. There could be three ways this goes, right? One is, so what's the, and by that specifically, I mean, what is that token worth, right? So it was priced at the amount of money that went into the project, which was, I think, $300,000, divided by 1 million tokens issued, 30 cents a token. And then it's, price discovery, right? So, but what's the price, right? I think different people are going to value this in different ways. If you are a experienced, biotech investor, you're going to say, well, that work is 8 to 10 years from becoming a product and generating revenues. You need to discount that for the cost of failure. There's probably a 1% chance it gets to market and actually generates $1. So I think it's worth 0, right? You could be on the complete opposite end of that and say, this is pretty cool, this is a new thing, let's just buy it up, right? Send it up with nothing other than hype, really. That's real though, right? But I think the third, which is the middle option, is what I see actually more likely to play out, is that if that project just gets to Series A and they're able to pull together a traditional venture capital syndicate, say then someone like myself, I'm going to come in, I'm going to look at that, I'm going to say, what is that? Let's just buy that out, get it off the books. We don't want it. It's going to hurt us going down the road because people don't understand it. But that's a good thing for the token holders, right? You get a great IRR, you cash out early, and hopefully that's a win for everyone. And then the work goes on and continues forward. So we'll see how that plays out. I have a few minutes left here. So this is my last slide, actually. Just to look forward with BioDAO and what's coming up between now and the end of the year. So I think we've already mentioned that we have a journal called The Longevist that's been launched, so you can check that out. For token holders, there'll be a number of announcements around token benefit programs, and these will be things kind of like frequent flyer miles, where you qualify for discounts on travel at hotels or access to curated events. I think that's pretty interesting. I think all DeSci DAOs should think about something like this. Could drive ownership. It's just a nice benefit to participate. I mentioned we'll have this token-gated venture fund also in the fall, likely in the fall. That will be a third option there, and that'll be like a traditional venture fund for accredited investors. And then more IP NFTs on the way. There's 2 I list here that are kind of in the pipeline, one around aging and one around Alzheimer's. And then we have a few new company spin-outs, and I think these might be the first biotech new company spin-outs coming out of DeSci. So that's a milestone and an achievement. And I listed 2 there. One's in oncology and one's with tRNAs. And then so just to wrap up, the last thing I'll say, there will be no Q&A. but the last thing I'll just say is from the panel. I thought one interesting thing that I took away from the panel was, in terms of future audiences for DeSci or future stakeholders, there were 3 that kind of were mentioned that I think we should all note and consider to bring into your own DeSci DAOs. So the first was patient advocacy groups, right? And we've seen this transition over the last decade probably, where patient advocacy, they would originally invest in just pure academic science, but then the people that were funding that, they didn't really see an outcome. And it shifted to they prefer to invest in drug discovery so that they could hopefully get medicines into their loved ones' hands. And so here there's an opportunity to tap into that crowd. So that would be audience number 1. And then audience number 2 is more pharma, right? We're working on that. And then the third audience, which I thought was interesting, was if we can get closer to investigators that run clinical studies at academic medical centers. And so maybe it'll be BioDAO, I might push for this, you'll see the first chief medical officer hired at a DeSci DAO in 2024. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.